Hello, and welcome to the Impact Series on the Green Builder Media Network. I'm your host, Mike Collignon. On this podcast, I'll have one-on-one conversations with leaders and innovators from a wide variety of disciplines. We'll talk about how they got into their field, the lessons they've learned, and advice they have for future generations of leaders. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Sybil Sharvelle. She is a professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Colorado State University and a founding member of the One Water Solutions Institute. Her doctoral work included the development of a system for treatment of gray water for potable reuse during space missions. Dr. Sharvelle was a member of the National Research Council Committee for Beneficial Use of Gray Water and Stormwater. She's also technical director of the Colorado State University Spur Campus Water Technology Accelerator Platform, which is a cutting-edge facility for testing water treatment technologies with different water sources. Sybil, welcome to the Impact Series.
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me. It's my pleasure.
You know, as we progress through these summer months, things are getting drier and drier out west. And if you live out there, which you do, or you pay attention to environmental headlines, then you know that water supply is of great concern to millions of people right now. And it's not just having enough water to drink, it's also about having enough water to generate power. Now, we're going to get into all that in just a little while, but first, I want to let our audience know that you gave an incredible keynote speech at the 2026 Next Generation Water Summit, and it really gave our audience a glimpse into how you became who you are today. So I'd like to take my podcast listeners back to when you were a young girl growing up in Indiana. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about where your appreciation for the water first started? Because I think a lot of people, no matter their geographic location, can kind of relate.
Great, thank you. So my appreciation for water and the environment really came from early childhood. And during my keynote speech, I mentioned that this place that my father used to take me that we called our secret place, it was kind of a small waterfall area in rural Indiana. It's a part of a little bit in southern Indiana where there were some, hills and things of the sort. And that's where we had our lake cottage that my dad would take us to on the weekends while my mother was studying in law school. And we would go there every weekend and kind of always go to this special place where there was this really pretty waterfall and just sit and watch it. And I really, from that, enjoyed having that experience of being able to be out there in the environment. And just the sound of running water, I think, is such a calming sound. And I think that really just made me appreciate water, the environment, and then also, always being able to have spaces like that to be able to kind of have that relaxation time.
And, what a journey it has taken you on. I mean, it's quite incredible. And like I said, I got a chance to kind of hear your story. It's partly why I wanted you on the podcast, was for you to be able to share that story. For me, there were kind of really two compelling reasons. The first is your work with the space program. Now, not many people get that opportunity. And while everything involved with those missions is important, I mean, you are working on a life-supporting system that has to ratchet up the pressure even more than maybe some of the other components of the mission. Can you give us a sense of what that was like?
So I was working on water recirculation for the International Space Station and long-duration space missions. And if you can envision in a setting like that, if you lose 1% of your water source every day, then after 100 days, you're out of water. So that was a constraint to really be thoughtful of. And it means that any long duration space mission or even shorter up to the International Space Station really has to have in place some kind of water recirculation. It just becomes impossible to transport enough water at the weight of water to be able to support human life during these missions over extended periods. So you really have to have water recirculation systems, and those systems have to be highly reliable, and provide safe water all the time. So working within those constraints of having to be very thoughtful about water losses, as well as the safety of the water, really put additional constraints on the system that I think promoted innovation and thinking in this way of circular systems. And I think, as where we are, you kind of mentioned the heat and drought that we have in the West, and where we are is we're getting closer to having those kind of constraints here on Earth where we can't afford to lose water and have to think about things in the circular system and be as efficient as possible with our water systems while also ensuring human safety and reliability of those systems.
Yeah, I mean, I used to make this joke when I would give presentations. It's not like there's a giant straw, right, that we can just send up to the space station to channel water up there. There's no water truck coming by to drop off water. That you really have to figure out how to account for every drop up there, don't you?
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to you have to think about, plan for every single drop of water you need, plus then some. And like I said, even like thinking about a 1% of water loss per day doesn't sound like a lot, but then when you think about it in terms of 100 days, it's a lot. So everything matters. And, for example, membrane treatment systems, you pass water through and you can get really clean water on the outlet side, but oftentimes there's this reject water and you may lose 20% of your water in a system like that. So you have to really think about systems where you can recover all of the water possible.
Is there ever a time where they do send up fresh water, so to speak? Is that ever a possibility?
They do send fresh water, and especially with the current International Space Station missions are the ones that happened, kind of in the time frame that I was doing my doctoral work. They carried up all of the water actually that they needed, and space shuttles would come up periodically to replenish with fresh water. It was just kind of, as we think about longer duration missions and missions to Mars and things where there's not possible to deliver extra water, you'd have to bring some water. But like I just said, if you think about the volume and weight requirements of water, it really has to be a small quantity in order to be able to be transported.
And to give our listeners a little bit of a sense, a gallon of water weighs somewhere between 7 and 8 pounds. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So just
6.7, if I remember correctly. But
okay. Yeah. So I mean, it gives you a sense of just the weight that you're referring to.
Yeah, think about when you go on a backpacking trip and you want to take a gallon of water with you. It's a lot of weight. It adds a lot of weight to your backpack. So that's thinking about getting through a day or two with a gallon of water is hard to even envision. But yeah.
Yes. And to me, it feels like the space station would be the prime example of the viability of reuse systems. Hey, you help keep people alive on the space station, right? Like, isn't that the best example you can give for why reuse systems would be not just viable, but feasible here on Earth?
Yes. I mean, I think that there's a long history of advancements in the space program and how those have been not only applicable to space missions, but have translated into impacts in many other areas. And I think this is a really good example of that, where really we started challenging ourselves to think about these circular water systems and recirculation of water and, reuse of it to the highest extent possible because of this constraint of space missions. But then that now translates into knowledge and a way of thinking that is becoming really important here on Earth as we continue to face many challenges.
And obviously you need the proper filtration and treatment systems in place as well. But I always kind of scratch my head anytime I hear any pushback to reuse systems, again, on Earth, because I'm like, we figured out how to make it happen up there. I think we can figure it out down here. It just, yeah.
Yes. Well, and I always say and in this day and age, we have treatment technology to take any water source, literally any water source, and treat it to potable quality or higher. So we can achieve whatever we want in terms of level of treatment and removal of contaminants and make water safe. So we have the technical know-how to do these systems, and it's more about now making them efficient, ensuring that they're reliable, and learning how to measure and monitor that they're performing how they were designed to. So it's really about getting people comfortable with the concept and ensuring our systems are completely reliable.
And there's a certain element of this that comes out of dollars, right? The financial, right? Saying,
Definitely.
okay, yes, it's possible, but that cost versus the cost of another option is also a lot of times that gets weighed in policymakers' minds, right?
Certainly, and in people's minds as well. I know for a lot of water recycling programs throughout the country where cities are taking their treated wastewater and treating it, polishing it for use for irrigation, that's actually more costly than supplying potable water to those users. But they kind of have to charge a lot of times prices that are competitive with the potable water supply charges. Now, I think when things really start to change is when there's not a water right or water available to be purchased for that end use. And then people become willing to pay more for the water because they don't have another option.
Do you, I mean, just looking into your crystal ball, do you see reuse systems catching on faster in places that are more reliant on well water or not?
Well, that's a good question. Places that have well water, especially because that well water often it's people, there's a lot of issues with people, continuing to try to get deeper wells and running out of water. So that could serve as a driver. But urban areas are also a huge area where this is developing because the urban areas are not able to develop further without bringing in additional water sources, which is many times impossible, or doing something to locally recirculate water and create local water sources. So I think that both of those are equally important areas where we're starting to see a lot of challenges with respect to obtaining water, and then seeing drivers for water recycling systems.
And I feel like I keep saying this phrase in like every conversation I have with my colleagues in the water industry, and then there's this looming Colorado River Compact decision, right? Like that looms over a lot of what's going on out in the West. And it certainly ties into your work, not just in reuse systems in general, but another topic that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. I did want to ask a question. You're a founding member of the One Water Solutions Institute. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization and their mission?
Yeah. So the One Water Solutions Institute at Colorado State University was really designed as an outward-facing institution that is intended to solve real-world problems related to water and water quality. One Water Solutions Institute really works on problems from urban to rural. So we work on urban water systems and efficiency of water there, as well as in the agricultural sector and water quality and water availability within the agricultural center. So the intent is, again, kind of a little bit different than traditional academic settings where a lot of fundamental research is conducted. At One Water Solutions Institute, we really seek to collaborate with utilities, agricultural producers, organizers in communities and within the agricultural sector to understand the problems and bring real-world solutions to those problems based on some of the cutting-edge research that we're doing here.
Okay. I wanted to make sure certainly our listeners understood what that was too, because you're tackling big issues. And the other big reason that I wanted to talk with you is your research into produced water. Now, before we even get into that topic, let's first define that term so everyone knows what it is that we're talking about here.
Okay, so produced water is a water that's produced during oil and gas extraction. So if you're familiar at all with the process called hydrofracking, that's where basically the oil and gas industry uses very high pressure water to crack into wells that weren't originally, before that technology became about, the oil and gas in those wells was not available readily. So this technology has opened up additional oil and gas resources. After this water is kind of used for injection, it becomes a wastewater source, but that can be cleaned up and essentially reused for many different applications. So the first most simple process is there's oil water separation, and the oil at the top can be skimmed off, and a lot of time that's collected for use. And then the remaining product is the produced water that, again, can go through various different treatment steps for beneficial use. So there's more and more kind of impetus in this industry, I think, for that produced water to be put to beneficial uses.
Okay. So, this is a bit controversial on a couple of fronts. Obviously, if we have a sizable quantity of produced water that we're looking to do, something with, that means we're using more fossil fuels and not less. So there's that. The other thing that is, I'll say, challenging is that there are, videos out there that show people being able to light the water on fire due to some of the elements that exist in the water. But as I said at the top, the West is getting desperate. Right? It's a really dire situation out there. So all options kind of have to be on the table to be discussed and considered. And I've talked with other guests on this podcast about the impending conclusion to the Colorado River Compact negotiations, how that kind of looms over the western third of the United States. The states out there are going to have to reduce their withdrawals from the river. So they're understandably looking elsewhere for water sources. I got that mostly right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So for those of you who are listening to this and going, oh my gosh, produced water, maybe you're not living out west. Or if you are, you have to understand just how dire the outlook is out there. I mean, read about Lake Powell, Lake Mead, and just the very nervous situation that people are in when it comes to the generation of hydropower reaching dead pool levels. This has a, pun intended, ripple effect across millions of people. So you can understand why this is being discussed as a viable solution. I guess I do want to ask a couple of questions because you are very much into the research of this. You're not necessarily selling this. You're just simply researching this to understand, is this viable? And if so, how is it viable? So my first question is, how does the water that's that deep, how does it ever get sufficiently recharged in a dry climate like that?
So are you referring to like the water that is getting extracted for the hydrofracking?
Yeah. The stuff that's really deep down.
And how does it ever get recharged?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously groundwater recharge is something we even deal with in the Midwest, right? But we're not talking about something maybe at the depths that what you're talking about with hydrofracking process. So how do you even sufficiently recharge that water?
Right. So that's a real problem, is that, and then especially in the West, is that we continue extracting water from our wells at rates higher than they can be replenished by the natural system. So we are not getting enough precipitation and enough groundwater recharge from other pathways to sufficiently recharge. So our groundwater levels keep decreasing. So it's very challenging to be able to ever recharge those kinds of wells. And, traditionally what the oil and gas industry was doing, so the alternate to beneficial use of this produced water was to re-inject it back into wells where confined aquifers, meaning that there's something surrounding it that it can't transport out. But then that water just gets re-injected back into the earth in a place that it's not useful and can never be accessed. Whereas if we take water, the produced water, and treat it to some kind of beneficial use, we're going to extract less groundwater or other water sources, and we're going to have, more water available for our use, essentially.
In either process, and I'm not an expert on hydrofracking at all, okay? So I asked this question very genuinely. In either process, either you're putting it back in the confined aquifer or you're using the produced water for beneficial use, is there a risk of subsidence, land subsidence at all in either of those processes?
Yes. So, and that was happening. I am not an expert on this, so I'm just going to speak a little bit anecdotally here. But that was particularly happening on the east with some of the hydrofracking operations there, where when they were re-injecting some of the water into certain areas, it was changing geological formations and causing some subsidence. And I think the oil and gas industry, to the best of my knowledge, has kind of gotten their heads around that issue and overcome a lot of those issues related to like some of the earthquakes and things that were happening because of the re-injection. That was new technology and new things. And I think the industry has learned a lot and figured out how to avoid that kind of issue. All of that having been said, in the alternate where we take produced water and put it to a beneficial use, we are avoiding that process of re-injecting into these areas that cause that issue.
Okay. And then the other question was on the energy side. So energy water nexus is a very real thing. Whether you're talking about produced water or anything else, they're intricately tied together. So how does the energy footprint of produced water compare to other alternative water sources?
So are you asking, like, if we're to treat that water for beneficial use of it, how is the energy input of that compared to, like, maybe taking municipal wastewater and treating that? Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the produced water process, right? You've got to extract, you've got to treat, and then pump it to somewhere for beneficial use, as opposed to other alternative water sources like a gray water system, black water system, rainwater systems, or at the municipal level. You're right. Yes, you can, kind of reuse at a municipal level. I'm just trying to figure out, because one thing I didn't share with our listeners is that you do focus also on decentralized water systems. And so in this giant mix of where are we going to find the water, I'm just kind of curious on the energy footprint side for some of these different options that the West is looking at.
Okay. Lots of different things to consider with that question. So first, it does take a lot of energy to treat produced water to be a quality for beneficial use. There are organic portions that are left in there, a lot of salts. So often treatment is gonna include some kind of desalination process, removing of the salts, and also some kind of process for removing organic constituents. It is a rather energy intensive process. Now, that having been said, I would be of the opinion that every industry needs to do their part to make use of water sources. And I like to say that I'm an advocate for use of local water sources. So for me, the best way to make use of produced water is to use it close to where it's generated. So potential end uses then become, well, you can actually use that water again for the injection process, which is the most common application of produced water, is that it's recycled or recirculated on site. So they're not extracting more water from wells to do the fracking, but they're using the same water. That's kind of the minimum, I think, that should be encouraged, promoted at these sites. And Colorado has actually put in place a moratorium that requires a certain percentage of sites to be meeting that, 100% by a certain year. I forgot the year, but basically that's policy in Colorado that the sites have to do that. And that they have a time period in which to implement that. That is not going to they're not going to, there's still more water left after they do that on-site recirculation. So there's options, like there's nearby agricultural facilities or fields to many of these oil and gas production sites where they can make use of that water. I'm working with the oil and gas industry right now where they have to restore land back to its natural state after they do the oil and gas extraction activities. So they're looking at making use of that water to irrigate native vegetation and kind of do ecological restoration projects after they leave the site. I think that's another really local beneficial use of that. Now, when we talk about the energy for all of that, any one of those examples compared to, for example, like a laundry to landscape gray water system where you're taking water from your laundry machine and diverting it out to a drip irrigation system in the yard, clearly that's a much lower energy option. But I think the important thing to consider is the local use of water and not transporting it far. So there's a lot of uses near a produced water site that could be beneficial.
Right. And also there's the quantity, right? The quantity you're talking about with a hydrofracking situation versus the laundry landscape, very
Totally
different scale of water. You'd have to be talking about neighborhoods doing laundry landscape, which
perhaps
I mean is a
thing. Small town, for example.
Right, and you can do it, but at the same time, it's a transformative activity for that municipality to say, okay, everybody's going to laundry landscape. And my experience has been the farther west you go, the more people don't want to listen to necessarily that the government says you have to do this. So that may be a challenge to transform a community in that way.
Yes, definitely.
Is there a difference in what you have seen? And admittedly, you are no hydrofracking expert. Is there a difference in the Eastern methodology of hydrofracking versus the Western? Are there any different practices there, or do they kind of stay pretty consistent?
I honestly don't know the answer to that because I do all of my work in the West. I have not even talked to or been to a facility on the East Coast, so I really can't answer that question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. And I'm curious too, like to the water part, and not so much the process of the hydrofracking, but on the water side of things, on the out east, what are they doing with it? Like, are they thinking about these things as well, like the West is, because it's not as pressing an issue? I don't think they're thinking
about these things in the way that we are in the West. Yeah. I have not actually heard of people talking about using produced water at any of those East Coast facilities in the way that we're talking about it here in the West, because where the oil and gas extraction is happening is also in really extreme arid regions of the West here. So there's so many drivers to be thinking about that water and how it can be beneficially used.
Yeah. So you are a professor, correct?
Correct.
And you're a mentor to others as well. So what's the biggest piece of advice that you have for the next generation of leaders?
So one piece of advice I would have is just think about everything in terms of efficiency and circular systems. See where you can achieve efficiency and where you can achieve this concept of circularity. But there's a balance and there's trade-offs, and some parts of circularity may not always be efficient. So we have to be mindful about all of those decisions and how we think about circular systems and recirculation, and making sure that we are always striving for the system that is as efficient as efficient as possible. And thinking about what you've alluded to a lot today is this kind of water energy nexus. And I had a program on the food energy water nexus, and really thinking about those connections between our systems and thinking about things holistically, not just, let's make sure this 2 drops of water gets recirculated from start to finish, but let's make sure we're thinking about circularity where we can and being cognizant of the efficiency and the connections to the holistic system with food, energy, and water.
Well, and you bring up food, energy, and water. I mean, that's a topic that I haven't gone into yet on this podcast is food and food security. And we talked a little bit about at the summit, but not much on agriculture. We certainly get asked about it a lot. Hey, you're going to talk about agriculture here because, of the water that's used for agriculture. You need the food, but the food needs water. So it's a very challenging thing when it comes to the western half of the United States. So I'm curious about your work in that space as well, because you're right. Locality makes a lot of difference, right? If you can really reduce your energy footprint, the closer you operate, as opposed to, let's have a pipeline and send it hundreds of miles.
Right.
That's a big energy footprint there. And so from the food perspective, and if we can kind of talk a little bit about the food and the water part, what are you seeing in that space to possibly have more water efficient farming practices?
There's a lot of work at Colorado State University and many universities, but there's a lot of work here on irrigation efficiency and finding approaches to water crops more efficiently, but also crop management strategies that are beneficial for the water and soil system and kind of some of these sustainable agriculture practices. Colorado State happens to have a lot of this research because we're the Colorado Land Grant University and have a school of agriculture and have really engaged in this. But there are so many practices coming along, and more agricultural producers are being willing to try these things because they see the risk in water and the scarcity of water and what that means for their industry as well. So there's so many things that can be done, and I think that we are starting to see more adoption of some of those water efficient practices and irrigation systems, as well as, like I said, management strategies that work toward better management of the soil and the water to reduce the water requirements that are needed for irrigation. So there's a lot there. You had mentioned the locality issue, and I think an important consideration here in the West is that this is where we have a lot of animal feeding operations, and so far we are a world that consumes beef and animal products, and the feed for those animals is mostly grown locally in this region. So people will say, why grow corn and wheat in Colorado and some of these places? We should be growing other crops. And I think we do need to take a holistic look at our agriculture systems and see what can be done. But I think an important part of this problem is that our animal feeding operations reside in the arid West. And if we wanted to transport that feed from somewhere else, then we have a huge energy consideration there with that transport because it's really heavy. So the idea is to grow the crops locally to meet those needs of the animal farming industry,
while also balancing growing crops that are climate appropriate too.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a complex and wicked problem, and I think that there are things that could be done to try and see, what are crops that would be highly efficient in this kind of climate that we have and would reduce our water requirements. But, we have to do all of that with the balance of considering, the industries that are here and how they need to be supported.
Right. And I don't want to skip over something that you just hit on, which was that you're seeing farmers are willing to learn about new methodologies, because I have some farmers in my extended family, and they can sometimes be a little resistant to change. They've learned from previous generations and they are used to that. And to get them out of their comfort zone can be a little bit of a challenge, but you're seeing, people, an industry that's starting to kind of say, hey, I think we kind of need to do this, or we're willing to do this. And just from a personal perspective, I've started to see a little bit of a mind shift in, oh, maybe we need to consider this, that, or the other thing. So in some ways, I want to give credit to the farming industry to say, hey, thank you for opening up your mind to some new ideas and new approaches, because if not, we would be even in a worse situation.
Right. I think that, like I said, they recognize there's a risk. And agricultural producers are stewards of the land. When the land is in a bad condition, they can't do what they need to do.
Right.
To produce crops and make their income. So they do have a care for the environment, and they do have an understanding that they need water. So I think that just the kind of the current conditions of our world are starting to drive a lot of changes that maybe we weren't seeing 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And it's encouraging to see, but at the same time, you wonder how fast we have to do it, right? Like, how much time do we have before things start getting really, really dire?
That's the important part.
Yeah. Well, Sybil, thank you so much for joining me on the program. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to interview me today and talk about these interesting topics. So thanks so much.
Dr. Sybil Sharvelle, everyone. Stay tuned for more episodes of the Impact Series podcast on the Green Builder Media Network. I'm Mike Collignon, and I'll see you again soon.
Before you click away, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. And don't miss the daily coverage on sustainability, housing, and what's next for home building at greenbuildermedia.com. Stay informed, stay ahead.